During her recent interview by late-night talk show host Jimmy Kimmel, congressional Democratic superstar Jasmine Crockett repeatedly roasted Marjorie Taylor Greene and made her pitch to the American people about why they should vote for Democrats in November. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, we have several clips to look at in this video. As you know, here at Pondering Politics, we're big fans of Jasmine Crockett. She's a freshman Democratic congresswoman from Texas, and along with her other fellow freshman Democrats like Maxwell Frost, Dan Goldman, Jared Moskowitz, I think they're reinvigorating the Democratic Party. I think they are suffusing it with much-needed energy and fire and rhetoric that the party sorely needs. I think they're carrying on the work of AOC, and they're even having an impact, as I've said in my interviews with Dan Goldman and Maxwell Frost. I think they're having an impact on the so-called elder statesmen of the Democratic Party, people like, Jerry Connolly and Jamie Raskin. They are just so good at what they do, and I'm excited to think of what might happen if they are given the majority in the House come this November. Well, she was recently interviewed by Jimmy Kimmel, and before I play those clips, because she does just exceptionally well per usual, I want to remind you of the most recent viral moment between Jasmine Crockett and her colleague, her enemy, Marjorie Taylor Greene, the MAGA cultist.
Ms. Greene, for 4 minutes and 21 seconds.
Mr. Chair, point of order.
Who's?
It's me.
Ms. Crockett.
I'm just curious, just to better understand your ruling. If someone on this committee then starts talking about somebody's bleach blonde, bad built butch body, that would not be engaging in personalities, correct?
A what now?
Chairman.
So, as a reminder, this is in response to Marjorie Taylor Greene first insulting directly Jasmine Crockett during a House Oversight Committee hearing. She was the one who basically struck the first blow. And when the Republicans on the panel refused to follow the rules and reprimand Marjorie Taylor Greene accordingly or force her to apologize, Jasmine Crockett made that dig at Marjorie Taylor Greene in an indirect way and only in retaliation. And of course, the whole thing is hilarious because Jamie Raskin, the Democratic vice chair of the committee, was like, whoa, and tried not to laugh. And then, of course, you have the Grand Inquisitor of the Biden impeachment inquiry, James Comer, going, doing what now? Just hilarity all the way around. Now, in response to this, and we'll get into it, but Jasmine Crockett has been further elevated, and appropriately so, within the Democratic Party, such that she is now one of the Biden campaign's chief surrogates. We'll get into all of that. But first, let's do some of the fun parts. Here's some clips of Jasmine Crockett during her interview with Jimmy Kimmel roasting Marjorie Taylor Greene. Great stuff.
Yeah. Can you tell us what led up to that? Or is there anything that we didn't see that precipitated that?
No, it's just that Marjorie is a little slow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Have you seen her, Marjorie, since the incident?
Yeah.
You have?
Finally.
And is it civil or no?
We don't talk.
You don't talk, yeah.
No.
Is she the dumbest person in the House of Representatives?
I'd be hard-pressed to find someone dumber.
Yeah, I think she's right. It'd be pretty difficult to find a dumber person in the House of Representatives than Marjorie Taylor Greene. Although I should say that House Republicans do try to make it a competitive race, right? I mean, there are many idiots within the GOP. Paul Gosar, Chip Roy, Lauren Boebert, right? Marjorie Taylor Greene's frenemy, right? It's not like she stands alone. But I'm with Crockett here, and she would know better than anybody because she works with all of them. But Marjorie Taylor Greene deserves her reputation. Now, speaking again of reputation, Crockett's status within the Democratic Party, I think, was already on the rise, right? Because she is a fierce debater. She's a fierce rhetorician. The way she questions Republican witnesses during oversight committee hearings, the way that she has held the Republican Party's feet to the fire during these failed sham Biden impeachment inquiry hearings have all been the stuff of viral social media moments. But it was after this exchange with Marjorie Taylor Greene that apparently she was tapped by the Biden campaign to actually go out, so to speak, on tour and make the case to the American people to reelect the president as well as Democrats in general. Because, of course, we have to win back the House and we have to keep the Senate. And the Senate race in particular is particularly brutal. As I've mentioned in previous videos, we have 7 competitive seats that we have to keep. Republicans need only flip 2. It's going to be very, very, very tough to win back the House, keep the presidency, and keep the Senate. But this is what Jasmine Crockett has to say in terms of making her pitch to the American people on behalf of the president.
I've been trying to make sure that people understand that this election should be about them. We spend so much time focusing on the name, right? But the reality is that the only way we get anything done is if there is a strong team in place. And I can tell you that I have the best team that money cannot buy. That is for sure. And so it's about making sure that we've got the House Democrats and that we end up with the Speaker Jeffries instead of MAGA Mike, right? It's about making sure that we hold on to the Senate and that we have the White House. And so people should look at this election and be very selfish about it and say, you know what? I've got to do what's right for me. So when you look at what people are offering, what their platform is, whether it's, aligned with making sure that the convicted Orange Jesus is going to be praised, or if it is really one that focuses on the reality that, yes, we are doing well from a statistical standpoint on the economy, but that there's so much more that we need to do. We still know that housing is a struggle. So many people are not able to build that generational wealth because they can't buy a home right now because of interest rates, or the fact that the cost of food is still really high, while my Republican colleagues are saying things like, we need to cut $30 billion in SNAP benefits when people only get $6 a day in the first place. And that's the only way that we get a farm bill. Like, really just doing the research and saying, I deserve a better America, a more perfect union. And does it look like divisiveness, or does it look like someone who at least may not be perfect and I may not agree with wholeheartedly, but I know he's at least working for me?
Yeah.
I think it's a very compelling argument to make. And I think Jasmine Crockett is the right interlocutor to make it. I mean, again, she's so good at what she does in terms of persuasive rhetoric. But what's interesting is she kind of takes a different approach to how a lot of Democrats have approached this, right? So a lot of Democrats, and even myself included, have been guilty of trying to appeal to loftier ideas, right, about democracy, because Donald Trump is just objectively a threat to democracy. And, from my vantage point, we can't improve, the climate or voting rights or civil and human rights in general if the entire structure is brought low by an authoritarian, propelled by a fascist movement, right? You have to actually have, it's almost like if you want to decorate or paint the house that you want a certain way, you actually have to have a stable foundation before anything, right? Congresswoman Crockett's making the case like you don't even have to make that sales pitch to people, right? Because it's hit or miss. You can also appeal to people's own personal, particular best interests and self-interest and still make a more compelling case for President Biden than you ever could for Donald Trump. Now, Trump is benefiting from this notion of Trumpstalgia, right? This is the current portmanteau where people have memory hold the trauma associated with COVID, and in particular, Trump's mismanagement of COVID and the fallout of that pandemic, again, attributable to the chief executive's actions or inactions, and are grading him on a curve with rose-tinted glasses. It's easy to do, and especially with a population like ours who have such a short attention span. But the reality is that President Biden has done more, much more, just objectively speaking, to benefit the American people as a whole. I've referenced this breakdown before, but the Washington Monthly did a series of editorials, well-researched, where they hired a bunch of journalists to carefully investigate major policy areas between Donald Trump and President Biden and evaluate, who did better, who got more done, right? And there are some areas where Donald Trump, just objectively speaking, got more done than President Biden, right? You think of taxes, right? He created a $2 trillion tax cut for America's wealthiest people, 80% of the benefits of which went to top earners, the people who need it the least. But that's a much bigger, legislative accomplishment, even though I think it's terrible, than anything that Biden has done with respect to taxes. He packed the courts with 3 right-wing, deranged Supreme Court justices. That's better than what Biden's done. That is more influential than what Biden has done on the courts. Although it should be noted that because President Biden's in office and because we have a Democratic Senate, President Biden has filled more federal judges, right? So, circuit courts and things like that, people at the federal judges under the Supreme Court. He's put more judges in place than Trump and Republicans did. And that's huge because that was Mitch McConnell's entire agenda. But again, 3 Supreme Court justices tends to take the cake. But in everything else, just legislation, regulation, national security, labor and the economy, Biden has a much better record, especially when you consider what he inherited. Donald Trump inherited an economy that was pretty much firing on all cylinders from President Obama, who in turn had to dig us out of the Great Recession left by the Bush administration. So he inherits an economy firing on all cylinders, takes credit for all of it, and then tries to get you to not blame him for his 4th year in office, even though he was president at the time. Biden, like Obama, took a crisis, turned it around, and unfortunately, he's not getting the credit I think he's owed by the same standard we apply to every other president. But also the fact of the matter is this economy is so good based on the macroeconomic metrics that Trump is trying to take credit for it, even though he's not in office. We've covered this in previous videos where he's trying to take credit for jobs and the stock market and wage gains and things like, oh, they're just anticipating I'm returning to office. That's how his brain works. That's how you know this economy is good, is because Republicans are desperate to take credit for it when they're not trying to downplay it. But Jasmine Crockett makes a compelling point. Like, listen, if you're employed right now in a post-pandemic America, that's because of Joe Biden and the Democrats. If you want to see the rich be taxed more rather than the tax burden be imposed on the middle and lower class, that's what Joe Biden wants to do. If you want to see a fairer labor market, right, where it's easier to unionize, where corporations have a harder time trying to union bust and to, suppress workers, that's Joe Biden's America. If you want healthcare, if you want more affordable healthcare, if you want healthcare in the event of once in a lifetime pandemics, that's Joe Biden's America. Remember, Donald Trump and the Republicans in the heat of COVID in 2020 were trying to still repeal and replace Obamacare. So she's making the case that even from just a pure area of self-interest, it's easier to make a case for President Biden and point to things that he's done and tried to do than Donald Trump. And I think that's a really interesting argument to make. And that's probably why the Biden campaign tapped her to be on the surrogacy roundtable, right, to go out and make the case for President Biden to the rest of the American people. I love it. I'd like to see rising stars like Jasmine Crockett rise further still. And who knows, hopefully this will be the change in the election that we need to see in order to tip Biden over the edge into victory. But let me know what you think in the comments.